Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. We are in a series called Heroes, and we've been taking a look at, and for some people that hadn't been here are going, what is that? We come to a movie production or what? But we are in a series called Heroes, and we've been taking a look at some characters in the Bible that don't have necessarily supernatural abilities, but that God used in some amazing ways. Some ordinary people that God has used in some extraordinary ways. We've looked at some characteristics those people have. We've looked at some weaknesses and some things that they had to work on and some things to be aware of. We took a look last week at that girls can be heroes too, and so that was pretty cool. And so if you wondered if girls could be used by God, we looked last week, and they certainly can. I don't think anybody had any questions about that, but if you did, this there. If you missed any of this, newbranch.tv is our YouTube site. You can watch any of these messages. Newbranch.net is our website, and you can listen to them or pick up CDs. We have free CDs on the way out if you want to listen to any past messages. And I highly recommend that you do. But today, we're going to talk about something that every hero faces. In fact, every hero has to overcome, and that's fear. But the word that kind of came to me this week as I was thinking about this was, it isn't just fear. I mean, it is, but you have to kind of define the term, because if you're not careful, you go, hey, yeah, I'm afraid, or I got to overcome this little fear. That's not really what I'm talking about. What I want to talk about today is desperation, being in despair. Has anybody ever felt that before? And so I got a definition for you. It used to be we would say, hey, I got this from Webster's Dictionary, but I got it from Google, so it must be true, right? I mean, so now we just say we don't even bother saying where the source, it's just Google. And so if we put up a definition of despair, you can write this down if you need to. If you've been in despair, you probably don't have to, okay? You probably know, but this will articulate a little bit for you. The thing I thought was interesting about the definition of despair was this, is that it can be both a noun and a verb. Okay, the noun means this, the complete loss or absence of hope. The verb means lose or to be without hope. So you're basically saying the same thing. But the reason why I wanted to point out the fact that it's a noun and a verb is this, is the noun part. We think of it as a verb or an adjective, saying, I have despair, I'm desperate. But the noun part means this, it is what you are. Does that make sense? It defines you. And if those that have been in despair, you understand what I'm talking about, because it's like a dark cloud has encapsulated your life, and now it's no longer that's an adjective that describes me, or it's a verb and something that I do, but it hasn't been separated out of who I am. And that's what I want you to see. Here's some synonyms for it. Hopelessness, disheartenment. It's kind of this idea of just a dark cloud over your heart that comes in. Anybody ever felt that? And it's just this desperate discouragement, anguish, depression, misery, wretchedness. We're really starting off on a great note today, right? Everybody's like, whew, nobody even wants to feel it. But if you came in and you feel that, today we're going to talk about, hey, how do you overcome that? In fact, I'll tell you this. If you're going to be a hero, you know what you got to do? You're going to have to overcome despair. You're going to have to overcome fear. A hero, you can flip to the next slide, Wyatt. My son's running PowerPoint. Speed it up, man. No, I'm just playing. Before you can be a hero, you have to overcome despair. We're going to talk about how. So turn with me to Judges chapter 6, and I'll kind of explain what the book of Judges is. Last week we talked about it. We've been talking about it for a few weeks now. And so just so you know what the time of Judges is, Moses had brought the children of Israel from Egypt to the Promised Land. And then when they go into the Promised Land, they go in under Joshua. And so Joshua comes in the book of Joshua in the Bible, and the book of Judges, has Joshua coming into the Promised Land, and then he leaves it in their hands. And God does this. Instead of having a leader like Moses or Joshua, he does this where he says, hey, you know what you're going to do? Now you don't need a bureaucratic government. Everybody will like that? Amen. Are we ready to get rid of a bureaucratic government? That'd be nice, wouldn't it? And so what he did in the time of the judges, or during this time period, is that he said, hey, you don't need a bureaucratic government. You just come directly to me. And as long as you follow my rules, and he kind of laid out in the book of Deuteronomy how they could make sure that the blessing of God remained on them. But if they didn't, then some bad things would happen, and that's what they did. And so what happens to them is after they get into the Promised Land, they are in this huge prosperity, everything's going great. And the next few generations forget God, and then the hand of blessing comes off of them because they're now worshiping idols instead of God and saying these idols did this, not God. And so God's hand of blessing comes off, and that invigorates their enemies to come and take them as slaves. And then when they become slaves, guess what happens? Then they get desperate, okay? And they cry out to God in despair. Anybody ever had a prayer like that? I mean, you never pray better than in a crisis. And so they pray to God, God, deliver us. And so then God would raise up a champion He would raise up somebody, a deliverer, or in this case, they called them judges. That's what the book of Judges is all about. He would raise up a judge to come and deliver them. And so last week we talked about Deborah being a judge, and during that time, then when the judge is there, they would get rid of all the bad idols, and they would start worshiping God again. And by the way, they usually have a big battle where they'd throw out the enemy, and then the judge would take place, and now they started worshiping God again. Good things happened. They started to prosper again. Everything was good. And then guess what? The next generation, because they were prosperous, forgot God and went back down, and this cycle just kept on and on in the book of Judges. So last week we left off with Deborah, and today we're going to pick up from there. That, guess what? After the time of Deborah, after they've been blessed by God under Deborah, then here's what happened. Judges chapter 6, verse 1. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And we could add again, okay? Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And for 7 years, he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Now, you can look throughout Scripture and you can see who the Midianites are. They're found all throughout the Bible. But now the hand of blessing comes off of them, and now the Midianites come in, and this just seems to be one verse, but he delivers them into the hands of the Midianites. So now the Midianites come and they take over. And you can read the next few verses to see what they did. What they do is they come in. You'd have to read about a city being besieged to understand how horrible that can be. We've never had that in our country since England, and so we don't know what that feels like to have a standing army come in and just do terrible things to you. And here's the kind of things they would do. You go out and you plant your fields. How many people have a garden? And then they would come in and eat your food. It's kind of like your kids. You go out and do all the work, and then they just come in and snatch that stuff up. You get it? Now, that really didn't mean much to me when I read about they took all their crops, okay? Because how many people like vegetables? If you like vegetables, that's good. I don't care about vegetables, so that did nothing for me. I'm like, good. Take the broccoli, we're good. But then they did something that I just found to be the worst thing imaginable. They took the cattle, right? I mean, they took the cows and the sheep and the pigs. No, they didn't have pigs or Israel. But they had, right, they didn't, right? I mean, they didn't have bacon, but it's okay. They had turkey bacon. Okay, you get the idea. Boy, we really get in trouble there. You know, I'm good taking the vegetables, but guess what? It's a bad day for everybody because now there's no food. Every time you make a meal, they kick down your door, come in, take the food off your table, take the food off of your kid's plate, and they take all your food. That's what they did for 7 years. That's a bad day, right? I mean, have you ever been around your spouse when they haven't eaten after work and you're going to have this big conversation, but they haven't eaten yet? Don't talk to people when they haven't eaten. They get in a really bad mood. This is a bad mood for 7 years, trust me. And so whether you're a vegetarian, how many vegetarians do we have? Oh, this is awesome. We had no vegetarians first service either. I don't know if you're afraid to say it or we're just not that crowd. I got you. That's good. We all love meat. But how many people love vegetables? How many people love meat? How many people love meat better than vegetables? Okay, it's a bad day for everybody. No food. They take it all. And you just have to argue over the scraps. If you want to talk about the worst human condition is a group of people starving, can't do any better, and now find out how dark it can get. It's dark. It's desperate. It's despair. Trust me when I tell you that. Verse 6 goes on to say what it's like. Midian so impoverished. I'd like you to circle that word. So impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So impoverished. I want to put the definition back up of despair. Because here's what I understand. That's what it means. Impoverished. When we first started church, we were trying to help some people with benevolent needs and different things, and we learned some tough lessons about that. And what I learned was I started reading books about it, and there's this great book out called Helping Without Hurting. If you've never read that, that's a great book about how to help people without enabling them or getting them. But one of the things that it talked about, people in extreme poverty, is that poverty is like this. It gets inside you. It's a noun. It's not just a verb. It's not just something that happened to you. It's something that gets inside of you. And if you don't understand that, what will happen is you'll think, I can give you a resource and that will change your life. But until you get the poverty out from inside, and that's what they said. They said as soon as we could give them hope again, then they could start to flourish. But as long as we were just giving them resources, the resources wouldn't do them any good until you started to deal with the true human problem of what I would consider despair. That's where they're impoverished. And out of that impoverished, out of that desperation, out of my kids are starving and I'm starving and it's been 7 years and I don't know what to do, guess what happens? They cry out to God. You ever prayed like that? It's amazing. So before we get into it, though, I want to say a couple of things, and especially for the church people in the room. How many church people? Don't raise your hand. How many church people do we got? Right? Because I think we could mess up here, and I've seen it messed up here, and because I've been here, then I kind of understand, and it don't take much to go back to despair. And so here's what I understand about despair. Here's what doesn't help somebody that's in despair. Can I tell you what it is? It doesn't help to tell that person to just snap out of it, okay? And let me put that in religious terms because a lot of us go, well, I'm not really saying that. What I'm saying is God is blessing you. God is so good, okay? That doesn't help the person in despair because they can't hear you. You see, because what you're doing is you're coming to them saying, God is so good and he's got this for you, and snap out of it in this moment. And what you're not realizing is you're thinking it's just an adjective. You're thinking it's just a verb. And what you're not realizing is it's inside of them because of what they've experienced. And if you're in despair, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because every time somebody says it, one or two things are going to happen when they say snap out of it. You're going to get angry. That's what I did. Okay? You're going to go, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea. You're going to look just like Brian right now with his arms crossed. I'm sorry. I always pick on Brian. I'm surprised you come back. Thank you. But you're going to come in there and you're going to be mad, or you're going to be like me. I'm going to sit in the back row, and as soon as you start saying that stuff, I'm going to walk out the door, and the pastor's going to stop me, and I'm going to tell him what I think. You don't know nothing about my situation. You don't know what it's like for me. That's nice for you to talk about a God that provides. I don't know nothing about that. That's the first thing. Don't just tell him to snap out of it. Second thing is this. Don't just criticize him. In fact, don't start with criticism. Because a lot of people think, you know what, here's what your problem is. They think it's a logical problem that's going to be fixed by me giving you a study and teaching you something new, and it's not. It's something that's inside of them that has to be dealt with from the inside out. And if you're not careful, you'll criticize them. You know who I find the people that are most harsh with this? I know because I was one, and now I see other people doing the same thing. The people that are most desperate are the most critical. It really is. And it's funny because they're criticizing other people in desperation. They're just not the same desperation. And so they criticize them saying, you need to snap out of it. And they're just really harsh with them. And I got to tell you, it doesn't work. If you're going to try to help somebody in despair, and what we're going to see from this story today from God is that it doesn't work to just do that. Here's what works. You want to know what works? You know what helps a person that's in despair? You know how you help somebody? Grace. It takes a lot of grace to do it. In fact, when I read that book, Helping Without Hurting, they said, can you do yourself a favor? Don't help anybody you're not willing to build a relationship with. That changes things, don't it? Don't give a resource until you're ready to build a relationship. If you're not willing to jump in and build a relationship, then don't bother because you're only in it for the short term. And by the way, you do more harm than good. And we've watched that happen all over the world. When you come in and the United States throws big money at just resources and think you're going to write the check and fix it, guess what happens? You just devastated their economy and didn't even know it because you didn't know what you were doing. See? You get the idea? Don't do it. It takes grace, which means that takes time. You know what grace entails? You got to be patient. And we see this from this story. It's not just snap out of it. It's not just change in a moment. It's not just I need a resource. It's how do you get desperation out of you? How do you help somebody with desperation? It takes a lot of grace. The last one is this, is what despair produces. And I want you to see that. What does despair do? Because you may have never thought this before. But I think somebody needs to hear it. You see, I think that our country is starting to enter a time, and some people don't realize that I even know this, that the country is starting to enter a time of real desperation. Now, we haven't felt the results yet, but we're getting ready to, and some people see it, and we're desperate, and we don't realize what God is doing in desperation because we don't realize that desperation is a gift, if you didn't know. And what despair does in your life, and maybe you didn't know this, it sets the stage for God. It does. And I tell you, that's usually the only stage that he walks in on. Because otherwise, you'll think you did it. Otherwise, you won't be able to do what God is calling you to do. And in that moment, you tell me if it's not true, have you ever had a desperate prayer? Have you ever prayed better than that? Can I tell you where God does miracles? In desperate situations. Isn't that right? People that are in despair. And it sets the stage for God to walk in on. And it's taken 7 years to get them where they're here. And they're crying out to God. And now God's about to show up. And we're going to find out what happens here. Okay? Judges chapter 6, verse 7. Here's what happens. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian. You know, I can replace Midian with the word despair. Because of their despair, they cried out to the Lord. Here's what God does, okay? Verse 8. He sent them a prophet. God is about to speak to them. And I want to pause here because I think some of us need to hear this, and I know I have. And so I'll just pause here for a second. The person that he sent. Now, I've done a lot of studying, and maybe somebody studied more than me. That's great. But I've been doing a lot of studying, a lot of research on this particular topic. I've listened to many pastors, so a lot of stuff you're going to hear came from other people. But you know what I found out about this guy? Nobody knows who he is. Now, I got to tell you something. When you're in the worst possible moment of your life, you know who you don't want? The no name, right? Anybody want that? I want somebody nobody knows about to come and give me the word from the Lord. And you know, I want the big name, okay? This is the day when I'm in desperate situation. I've been starving for 7 years. I want God to send Billy Graham personally, right? I want Billy Graham to text me and say, well, this is what God is saying today, you know what I mean? Or maybe Billy Graham doesn't text, but he'll call me, you know, or he'll show up at my doorstep and talk to me. What I don't want is the no name, but I need to pause here because oftentimes when you look through the Word of God, this is really true. That God uses the person with no name to say the most profound message. Be prepared for that. That it's somebody coming out and you're going, I don't know if I can trust that word, but I'm so desperate that maybe I'll listen to what you got to say today. And that's when God shows up. And he uses a word from the Lord. That's what the prophet is. He's giving a word from the Lord to these people in absolute desperation. They prayed, God sent a no name to come talk to them. Okay, maybe that's how you feel about me. That's you, John. That's good. Because God's got a message for you today. All right, verse 8. Here's what he said. Who said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. I brought you out of Egypt. And I put ... so you can go back and read what else he did bringing them out of Egypt. Verse 10, he goes on to say this. I said, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship other gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me. So he's reminding them how they got in this situation, how they got to the promised land, and how they got to this situation. Now, if you're in the worst season of your life, some of you are, don't raise your hand, I know you might be there. Let me ask you a question. Do you want to talk about your past, or would you like to talk about your future? In fact, I don't even think I want to talk about, when I'm in my most desperate time, I don't want to talk about my past. I definitely don't want to talk about that or how I got here. I definitely don't want to talk about too far into the future because I can't even see that. All I want to know is, how are we going to get through this crisis? Get it? And God sends a prophet to speak to them, and what he tells them is, before we go any further, you know what we got to know? What happened in the past. We're going to have to deal with the past. Here's what it takes. If you want to overcome in despair, you want to overcome despair in your life, number one, you've got to get your past in proper perspective. I must put my past in proper perspective. That's what God wants to do. Because here's what God's doing. He's going, hey, I need you to remember why you got here. That's repentance, okay? He's telling them, hey, it's your fault. Okay, we kind of got that, God. We know it's our fault. That's why we're crying out. Gotcha. But it's not just that. It's saying, hey, there's two versions of your past, if you didn't know. There's your version of what you experienced, and you think that's the right version. I got you. And I need to explain the word perspective because we're going to talk a lot about that. You know what perspective is? It's how you see the world. It's the lens in which you're looking through. We can use the word paradigm. A lot of people go, I don't know what that word means, so let me just make it simple. It's how you're looking through the world. So if you take glasses and you put them on and they're rose-colored, guess what you see? Rose-colored world, right? If you take on and you put on poop-colored glasses, okay. You know who you are, okay? That's what you're seeing, right? And I'm going, perspective makes all the difference in the world. And if you have a desperate perspective, what he's saying is you're not viewing your past right because you got to understand something. If you're in despair today, you're thinking this despair is the worst possible thing it can be. And God is saying, no, you're missing a part of this equation, which is it's the stage that's set for me. Everything in your life has led you to this moment, at this time, for this moment. And I'm using all the things, good and bad, to bring you to this moment so I can do something incredible. That's a perspective change. You get it? And he's going, I got to put that in proper perspective. By the way, I delivered the people in Egypt. You forgot about that, didn't you? Did you forget I can do that? Because after 7 years, you're going, hey, what has he done for me lately? You get it? Not what did you do 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. Get the picture? God's reminding them. Very important. Now, the next part, it kind of just seems to skip. I don't know what else happened with the prophet, but here's the next part. Verse 11. The angel of the Lord. If you could underline that, that's a whole study in and of itself. You want to get real theological, here's a great place to go and study. The angel of the Lord, what that means. The angel of the Lord could mean a couple of things. One, it could mean a real angel that appears, and we're fine with that. Or it could mean the appearance of God in form. Does that make sense? Like appearance of God as a human. We see that in Moses, that God come to Moses in human form. This could be also a Christophany, which means Jesus appearing before Bethlehem in human form. Whatever it means that God is personally speaking to them, and that's what I want you to see. So for the sake of this, we're just going to say this is Jesus, and we're going to make that interpretation today. So just know there's some differences of opinion. I'm good with that, okay? But I got the stage, so I'm going to say it. All right, so just for the sake of it, it's Jesus came and sat under an oak where, and there's lots more to this verse, there's lots of big words that I didn't want to have to say, so you can go back and read it, where Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Okay, so get the picture. The prophet has just come. Gideon isn't there with the rest of Israel, I don't think. He is hiding in the winepress. And you're going, why in the wine press? Is he trying to drink? No, he's trying to scrape up wheat to make a meal. Now, my theory is, and I heard this from a pastor this week, and I thought it was kind of cool. Take my wheat, don't take my meat. And that's kind of where the men are at here. They're going, no. I need meat, I need a meal. And he's just trying to hide out and get a meal. That's how desperate he is. He's so starving. You'd have to be starving to understand the desperation in a starving person. And he's just trying to make a meal. And he looks up long enough to realize it's not a Midianite, and then he doesn't realize who's sitting next to him. Now, who did I say sitting next to him? The angel of the Lord, possibly Christ himself. Either way, it's God come to speak to him, and he doesn't recognize it because of where he's at. Not because of where he's at physically, because of where he's at inside. Get it? He can't hear the real word. Okay, so verse 12. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, this is what the angel said. This is what Jesus said to him. Lord, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Now, I hope you see the humor in that, or the sarcasm that I kind of read this in the past thinking, he's being sarcastic, right? This guy was not even there when the prophet came, so he had to go to where he was because he didn't even hear the word from the Lord, really. And so now he's showing up, and this dude is hiding. He's not helping anybody. He's not feeding small children. He's not doing anything like that. He's hiding and trying to get a meal, and he looks up long enough to go, oh my gosh, it's the Midianites trying to steal my food, and then he looks back down. And this guy's coming up saying, hello, mighty warrior. Really? It's almost like a schizophrenic conversation until you realize the context of what is going on here. Because here's what's going on here, and I need to explain it because I do think it's important for somebody today. Because otherwise, you may not understand God if you don't get this part. God is coming into this desperate situation, and you know what he's saying? I do not negotiate with despair. Maybe you need to write it down. Because some people are going to think that's harsh. Oh, you go there and you hug on Gideon. I'm so sorry, Gideon. No, I know where you're at, Gideon. And you are a mighty warrior in me. What? What are you talking about? Because here's what God knows. If I negotiate with your despair, it's kind of like the United States. We say we don't negotiate with terrorists. You know why? Because it will invigorate them to do even worse acts. So we go, no, we're not negotiating. You know what God's saying? I don't negotiate with your despair. I know that you're there. I know where you're at. I know exactly. Now, some people are going to struggle with this day because eventually you're going to start to realize God knows where you're at, and he lets you be there. That's a tough day, isn't it? What? We'll get to that. But before we go there, I just need to tell you, God doesn't. You know why God doesn't negotiate? Not because he's mean, not because he's harsh, because his plan is better than negotiating with despair, and he ain't going to negotiate. He's got a great plan that's awesome, and he's about to unleash it on Gideon, and Gideon can't hear it. Why? Because Jesus isn't there? Because the resources aren't there? It's Jesus. I think he's got enough power. You get it? It's not a lack of resources. You know what it is? Despair is in this man. Now let's see what he has to say. Verse 13. Pardon me? That's a nice way of putting it. Pardon me, my Lord. Now, when we say my Lord, because the Bible's written different times and stuff like that, you're thinking he's talking to God. No, that's not what Lord means. It means sir. Think of it that way. Who? What are you saying? Are you insane? He could have said those kinds of things. That's basically what he's saying. In fact, he goes on to say this, and it's kind of interesting because he doesn't know it's the angel of the Lord. He doesn't realize it's God there talking to him. So he feels free to say what he's really thinking. Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, as I just heard, and I kind of overheard that prophet saying something like this, why has all this happened to us? Anybody praying prayers like that? Anybody in despair and going, God, how could you have let me be in this situation? Yeah. Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, "Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?" See, you thought I didn't hear that prophet. I heard it from a distance. I just think it's worthless because, yeah, he delivered them out of Egypt, but where is he at now? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of the Midianites. He has given us into the hands of Midian. So where is he at now? You say he delivered us back then. It's been 7 years, and I'm starving, and I can't even get a meal, and I've watched people starve, and I've watched atrocious things that I can't even talk about on this stage today that's happened in the life of Israel, and where is God at now? I want to pause there. You know what this is? You know why I think it's a blessing and why I think God didn't say, hey, wait a minute, this is God. Lightning bolt. Remember when I told you that they need a person in despair? They don't need snap out of it. They don't need that. You know what they need? They need grace. And what God gives Gideon here is grace. And the gift of desperation, you know what it causes Gideon to do? For the first time, and I have a feeling somebody in this room needs to hear this today. He has a real conversation with God. Now, he didn't know it was God. And when he finds out, he's a little scared. But you know what I think God is saying here today? You know what I'm waiting for? I don't need your flowery prayers. I don't need your flowery language. You know what I need you to do for the first time? I need you to pray what's really going on inside. By the way, I already know. I already know what you really think, and it's coming out in your life whether you know it or not. We all see it, but you don't. You know, it's like being fat. People notice. Even if you wear stripes, they know, okay? I mean, it's just, okay. Black doesn't cover up. Just doesn't. I know. I tried, and now I have video, and I get, okay. Same thing is true for desperation. God knows. It's seeping out of your life. And God is saying, would you just say what you think? I'm sure there's a line you can't cross with God. You know what the problem is we're so scared of the line. We're so scared of getting everything right that we won't pray the prayer. And you know what? I see this all over Scripture, that the people that God used had real conversations with God. It's a fact. So if you want to overcome despair, you know what you got to do? You got to have a real conversation with God. I'll give you one example. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and it's very depressing because I was in a very depressing time. It's the book of Job. It's 30-some chapters of absolute despair. It's miserable. And it starts off so good and ends what I would consider a bad prayer at the end, and I think we have it mixed up. You see, Job starts off saying, somebody's going to be mad and email me. Email me at albin@newbrace.net. No, I'm just playing. That's not my email. The reason why we love Job is at the very beginning when his family dies and all that, and I think he meant it, he says, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Isn't that true? And it's true. It's an absolute true thing. Can I tell you what he says by chapter 30? Nobody likes to talk about that, right? They like to say, this is the context of Job, and it is, but it isn't how he prayed at the end. You know how he prayed when God actually answered him? He said, God, I wish I was a stillborn child. Somebody said, you can't say that. That's what he said. And guess what? When he got real with God, guess when God spoke to Job? Not in chapter 2 where he's saying all this flowery stuff. You know where he spoke to Job? Bet you never heard that message, have you? You know why? Because nobody wants to say it. Because it's real. And when he did, then God showed up and he didn't strike him down. You know what he did to the man that's desperate? You know what he did to the man that's in despair? He didn't say, snap out of it, Job. He had a conversation with him. He showed grace. And he's waiting on you to be real with him for the first time and say a real prayer to God because you know what? He's a big God and he can handle it. And he isn't surprised at where you are. And he isn't going to negotiate with despair because he wants to get it out of you. You want to overcome despair? You know where it starts? In fact, you can't get past this. Oh, I wanted to get to the battle today. We're not going to make it, by the way. Some of you are looking, you're going, oh, there's still 2 more chapters. We're not going to go there. But here's what I need you to know. Don't bother thinking about the battle until you deal with this. If you don't have a real conversation with God, you will never be ready for the battle God has for you. You will never have the blessing God has for you. It's not a lack of resources. Jesus is sitting next to him. And he has to have a real conversation. And for the first time, this guy lets it out. This is what it feels like. Where is God? I don't understand. All right. Verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, go. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have, and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Now, I'm sorry, there isn't other verses. I didn't skip, just so you know. What is he talking about? You know what it reminds me of? Okay, so when I was, growing up, I, play a lot of sports, especially outside sports where teams picked in the neighborhoods and stuff like that. When you're little, you're the last one to get picked. And as you get older, then you become the captain and you're picking people. And when you go to pick people for your team, can I tell you who you pick? There's two people that you pick. And I thought about this a lot because you usually only think about the first kind. You pick the best players so you can win the game, right? That's who you pick. But that's not the only people you pick. You know who else you pick? You pick the little kid that's out there that's so desperate to play. Brian, I used to pick you. I remember. Okay. That's stupid. All right. So you pick the little kid that they don't know how to play very good, and so you go, hey, you know what? They really want to play, and they're going pick me, and you're like, okay, it's a mercy. I'll pick you. Come on over to my team, right? But they want to play. You know who you don't pick? You don't pick the kid over sitting on the swing that's all depressed and looks like he's all broken up, and he don't even want to play. That's not who you pick. You know who God picks? He picks Gideon, who doesn't even want to play. Can you let that wash over you today? If you're in despair, you're the last one that you want God to pick. You're going, I'm out. And God is coming alongside of you and he's saying, I pick you. What? I'm picking you. That's why this conversation is so weird. He goes, am I not sending you? You can't see it because you're looking through the wrong perspective. You get the picture? All right, verse 15. Pardon me? You gotta love Gideon. Pardon me, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? That's a great question. My clan, wait a minute, he goes further. My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Can I tell you what despair does? I've kind of told you before. It skews your perspective. You got to know that. It unfocuses you. You can't see it. It's as if you're looking through a collage. It's as if you're looking through those flyers. You ever had somebody punch you in the face, and then you're seeing like stuff just coming because you got blood vessels going on. Maybe you hadn't experienced that. But you get the idea. And you're just going, I can't see. I don't see right. That's what it's like. That's what despair is like. You're seeing it not correctly. And so it makes it worse than it is. It exaggerates it. And so Gideon is taken and saying, hey, you know what? I can't do this. And not only can I not do it, but my whole family is cursed. Now, he's got a point because his dad did some bad things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's not the point. He actually came from a respectable family. If you look at the lineage of Gideon, he had some people that did some incredible things in the past. What are you talking about, Gideon? Manasseh is not the least of the tribes. It's not. Okay? What are you talking about? Why? Because his perspective is skewed because of his despair. That's what it does. Can I tell you, not only that, but it was so skewed, he didn't recognize who was sitting next to him. Somebody's in despair today, and I got to tell you, God is trying to talk to you, and you don't even realize that it's him. Okay. Verse 16. The Lord said, he says that, and the Lord says this, I will be with you, and you will strike down the Midianites, leaving none alive. Well, that's not the kind of player you got here, God, but okay, I will be with you. You know why you can do this? Not because you're so great. You know why you can get over fear? Not because there's not scary things. You know why you can overcome fear? Isn't because bad things don't happen. You can overcome because I will be with you, is what he's saying. And you will strike them down because of me. What God is doing here is he's saying, hey, to overcome despair, you've got a skewed perspective. Now you've got to get God's perspective. You want to overcome despair? You've got to get God's perspective. You can put it up, Wyatt. I must have God's perspective to overcome despair. God's view, not mine. There's a story that's going around right now. There's a person that had something incredible that happened in their life. And what it is the person had cancer and they thought they were going to die. And so when they actually survived the cancer, they went out and here's the tattoo that they got. It's a semicolon. Now, let me explain about semicolons, okay? I never used them in writing. I don't do a lot of writing. I'm not a great writer. I'm not great at grammar. And one of the things you learn, it's just a secret, never use a semicolon. You know why? Because it's usually a run-on sentence. And you're going, use a period because it's just easier, okay? You really don't need to use a semicolon. But I got to tell you something. God wants to use a semicolon. Here's why. Because here's what the lady's saying. She's going, hey, my life is a sentence, and I thought that this was a period. This is the end. This is how it ends. And she said, now I'm alive, and it's as if I got a new lease on life, and so that was that. This is my past, but it's a semicolon, and here's the rest of my life. You know what she tattooed on her arm? My story isn't over yet. Semicolon. You know what I like to see here? How many people love tattoos? You're outnumbered, man. All right, my wife does. I've never had one. I've never had a desire, but if I did have one, or if I had a desire for our church to everybody do this, right, have a tattoo party and we all get one, everybody's like, what? Satan. Gotcha. But if I did, let me tell you something. This is the one that I would recommend we all get. And it's this, a semicolon that says, my story isn't over yet, because too many people think you got a period because of your despair. And life is over because of your despair. And God is saying, wait a minute, your story's not done yet. I know that's your past. That just set the stage for what I'm about to do. You get it? And the reason why a tattoo is so it's permanent, so you always have a permanent reminder, God will be there. It's a semicolon, not a period. I say when it's over. And my story isn't done yet. And I can do incredible things. And he's starting to get him. But if you want me to do it, then here's what you're going to have to do. Here's my next picture. Now, I did that. Now, I got to tell you something about this. This is a bungee cord if you didn't know what that is. There's different places you can do it. And can I tell you something about how high you do it? It doesn't really matter how high you go, because the truth is 5 stories can kill you just as good as 10 stories. 20 stories can kill you just as good as 5 stories. Doesn't matter if you're going to die, right? But there's a difference in perspective the more you get up there. And there's a difference of perspective when you look up and when you're up and you stand out. Anybody who's been skydiving probably knows that, right? Where you get over the edge and you're like, this is not natural. There's nothing natural about this moment where I'm about to jump off and it just doesn't feel right, right? Yeah, doesn't. And you know what God is asking him to do? He's saying, hey, Gideon, you trust me? Jump. Wait, I haven't heard about your plan yet. No, you don't need my plan. I have the plan. You jump. You see, that's what it means. Your life isn't over yet. I showed up, and I'm sitting next to you, and I'm asking you, do you trust me? And now what you need to do is you need to jump. And the way you jump is, let me tell you how you know, is the same thing with parachuting and anything else. You trust what's holding you. Get it? It's not the fear of heights. It's, do I trust this? Okay? And all of it works, and let me tell you where all the fear goes away. The fear is all the way up until you jump. You know why? You know why the fear leaves you as soon as you jump? And I've talked to a lot of people that do this kind of stuff, and it did the same thing for me, was the fear is right here. You want to know why? Because it's the last time you have control. Once you jump, you're all about this, okay? No more fear. Because whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But it's in that moment that's the most scared. Yeah. And if you've been hurt, it's even scarier. You get it? God is calling him to jump. Verse 17, Gideon replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes. See, he's starting to buy in, but he's going, wait a minute, I'm struggling here a little bit. If I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign. Don't you like that? That it is really you talking to me. Now he's hearing, this is God standing next to him, and he's going, you know what, I'm going to need a little bit more proof that this is God speaking. He doesn't know who this is, but what he knows is you're starting to get to me, but I got to tell you, I'm going to need a little bit of a sign here. Now Jesus said to one generation where they said, give me a sign, and he said, you're wicked. I'm not going to give you any more signs, because he'd already given them signs. But let me say something about the person in despair. This is really important. He doesn't say snap out of it. It's me. Get over that. What are you doing? You know what he does? He offers grace. This is clear. Because he gives, and there's all these conversations, and there's all these theological people trying to figure out, was it right for Gideon to ask for a sign? Was it not right for Gideon to ask for a sign? I have no idea, but let me tell you what it is. It's God saying, you're in despair, and I'm not saying snap out of it, I'm giving you grace. That's what it is. Don't pay attention to the human side. Pay attention to the God side. And the reason why God is giving a sign is because of this. Verse 18, he says this, please do not go away until I come back. He's talking to God. He doesn't realize it. And he's saying, I'm going to go away. I'm going to get a burnt offering. This is what they did in the Old Testament. And I'm going to burn it up in front of the Lord. And then God's going to show up after I burn this offering. That's what he's thinking, okay? So he goes off and he gets a ram and he brings it back. And he says, please don't leave until I come back. You get it? And the Lord said, this is big L, this is God, he says this to him. He says, I will wait until you return. Can I tell you what that is? Grace. You want to know how you help somebody that's in despair? Grace. Because he understands, I've got to get this out of you. This is a conversation. I've been telling you these mighty statements. You don't believe me. I have all resources imaginable. You don't believe me. I need you to lead them. And in order to do that, come on back. And that's all right. I'll show you. I'll show you what I can do. So he comes back, and you can read this for yourself. And what he does is he puts the altar, he gets ready to put it up on the altar. So he puts it on this stone. And God causes fire to come out of the stone and consume the burnt offering in front of it. That gets his attention. Okay? And let me tell you how much. When you experience God in such a way, here's what happens, okay? Here's what happens to Gideon, verse 22. When Gideon realized, I want you to circle that. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, that's what happens in these moments. For the first time, he realizes who he's talking to. For the first time, he now understands, oh my goodness, this is God. God is in this. God is beside me. God is speaking to me. This is real. Alas, sovereign Lord. Remember where we heard that before? Samson. Remember when Samson finally realized what this was about? It's not about you, Samson. And what does he pray for before he pushes down the pillars? He says, sovereign Lord. Remember? Sovereign Lord. This is what happens to you when you're in that moment of despair and you finally realize that God is there with you and he's actually talking to you and he actually cares about you. And sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. And I got to tell you, that isn't necessarily you're thinking he's saying, amen, this is awesome. That's not what he's saying. You know what happened to him? All of a sudden, this is what's going to happen to you, especially if you've been in despair. You are going to say all the things you're thinking, which are horrible things. And then you're going to have the realization that God is really there and he just heard that. That's what happened to him. I just said, you haven't been there for us. You abandoned us. Oh my gosh. It is sovereign Lord sitting next to me. And I have questioned the Almighty and he is going to kill me. And here's what God says to him, verse 23. But the Lord said to him, peace, do not be afraid. You are not going to die. See, I know you said that. I know who you are. I know what's going on in you. You needed to get that off. You needed to have a real conversation with me, and now I'm ready to act, and it's okay, Gideon. You know who I am now. You want to know what it takes to experience God. You want to know what it takes to overcome despair. You've got to worship God. I must worship God. You can flip the next slide, Wyatt. To overcome despair, I must worship God. There is nothing like this moment where you all of a sudden in your time of despair, nothing's changed about your outward experience, but what has changed is inside of you as the desperation comes out and you're filled with the power of the Holy Spirit. That's what's going on for him right now. And he's going, this is unbelievable. Get it? Now, he's not all there yet. But God does this, and I don't want to take anything away from it, that worship, that's why coming here and worshiping God is so important in your life. That it's not just the style of music or if you like the music or whatever, but it's coming here and it's getting with God and experiencing God, whether it's here or wherever else you are, but worshiping him, it has stuff that you cannot understand what it does for you and what it does for God, because now all of a sudden he's going, you're believing me. That's worship. You get it? I see you for the first time, God. And when you do, it changes you, but it changes him. And there's this synergy that happens with this love of God that experiences in your life. And it's hard to describe unless you've been there, right? It's just like being married. It's hard to describe how much you can love another human being until you've been there and experienced it. But trust me when I tell you, it's the most incredible experience of your life. Now, a lot of people think it stops there. This is it. Now God's ready to use him. No, he's not. Because there's a second part to worship. And it comes next, okay? In fact, I didn't say this. Jesus did, okay? Here's what he said. That same night, the angel of the Lord said, take the second bull. You see, first part of worship, you've experienced it. I did it, okay? God did it. Second part of worship. Now I'm going to ask you to do something. Second, take the bull from your father's herd. The one 7 years old. Now, you think that's a mistake that they put that in there? You know, the one that was there, the one that was born before the captivity. Is that significant enough? He was born as a promise of God saying, I have been there all along setting the stage, and this bull has survived. You know how precious that bull must be if the Midianites are coming in and taking everything, and now you got one last one that's 7 years old, and now today I want you to offer that, and here's how I want you to offer it. You know how you offer it? Tear down your father's altar. Oh, there's something I forgot to tell you. You know the altar to Baal that they had? Guess who erected it? Gideon's father. Does that tell you anything? This is a family problem, man. You can't mean me. You know what my family does? And he says, cut down the Asherah pole. Think of it like a totem pole where they come out to worship Baal. Now, let me tell you what happens at the Asherah pole. And I'm only telling you this because I got a feeling there's some people that have done some debauched things, and you're thinking, oh, this is a pretty sanitized story. Let me tell you how you know what God calls it, and there's a word for it. He says, you're a harlot to Baal. You want to know why he says that? And we're not talking about figuratively. You prostitute yourself to Baal. You know what you do? You whore yourself to Baal. Why are you using such harsh words? Because that's what they did. They go there and have huge orgies. Gross, isn't it? Sin's gross, isn't it? You ever had sin take you further than you ever wanted to go? And you think God can never use me again? My family participated in this, God. And he's saying, I want you to go to that spot, tear down the Asherah pole, and worship me there. Because I can break the chain of any generational problem you might have. Any generational problem. If it's a mental illness, I can break that. You get it? If it's depression, I can break that. If you're an alcoholic, I can break that. If you're a drug addict, I can break that. You see what he's saying to him? Now go and tear it down, and on top of it, I want you to build. Here's what it is, verse 26. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord, your God, on top of the height. I don't want you to forget it. I want you to do it on top of it. Talk about putting the past in proper perspective. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down to offer the second bull as a burnt offering. Here's how I want you to do it. Cut down the Asherah pole, and the fire that comes, I want it from that idol offered to me. So as you do it, the greatest act of worship for God is remove the idol and worship me, okay? So you want to know how you overcome despair? You remove the idol, and then you establish true worship. The problem is this. This is why I wanted to say this is the second part. Because too many people, and I watch it over and over and over, here's what they do. They come here, they have an experience with God, they worship God, they start to feel God, they got some of the pressure off because they had a real conversation with God, and they stop short and they go, there's the Asherah pole, but I can't do anything about that because that's in my family for generations. Get it? I can't do anything about that drug thing, but I'm here to worship Jesus, but I'm still an alcoholic. You get it? You might be an alcoholic to the day you die, but you don't have sobriety. You get my picture? And what I'm telling you is God is saying, here's what I want you to do. I want you to tear that stuff down and offer it to me and watch what I can do with your life when you do that. Do everybody understand why this might be a little scary for Gideon? Now, here's the problem is, in the culture we live in, most of us don't have little idols. Okay? We don't, do we? If I ask you to throw out your idol today and we're going to light it on fire right here in the church, you'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But let me explain what idols are. And maybe you need to take this definition home and really think about this. An idol is this: anything I have to check with before I can say yes to God. Okay? That can be good or bad, can't it? Ooh, good things can be idols too. If I have to check with it before I jump. God, I would do what you're saying, but what? God, I would go fight the Midianites today, but, right? I would do this, but this is a generational curse. Gotcha. I would do this, but you know what? I'm afraid of what people might say about me. Get it? I would do this, but I checked my checkbook, and I don't have the funds for this. Can I tell you something? God isn't interested in your resources. And by the way, he doesn't provide them until you jump. I know that's going to rub people out wrong, especially the planners. And I believe in planning with all my heart. But no plan can replace what God needs to do. And if you think it is, then you're never going to experience God. Yeah, this country, let me tell you something. This is how deliverers are made. You want to know how it's going to be made? People are scared what's going on in this country, and they're looking to politicians as if they are the source. Let me tell you something. It isn't going to be done until we tear down the idols of what we're checking with. And some of it is our fear. Some of it is we're worshiping desperation itself. I can't give this up because then what would I have to complain about? You get it? I can't give this up because I'm afraid that this is going to cost me and my family's going to see, and I'm tearing down my daddy's Asherah pole, and now I'm going to offer a burnt offering to the Lord. That's scary, right? This is how deliverers are made. You want to deliver this nation? You think God can do it again? Or have we stopped believing? See, a lot of Christians, this is as good as it's ever going to get. You know why we're coming at it with such hate? Because it's not hate, it's fear. That we're afraid that God can't do anything in this nation anymore. That's not true. You know what God is raising up? He'll raise up the deliverers when they hear him, when they have done it, when we worship God. And then we take our idols and we throw them down and we burn them up and offer an offering to the Lord. And then he goes, now I'm ready. Okay. You get the picture. What do you have to check with to do it? And here's what Gideon does, verse 27. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. You know what Gideon did that day? He jumped. Now, you know the part of the story I want to talk about, the blood and guts and all the stuff that happened later, and we'll get to that another day because we're not going to make it this time, okay? I want you to read that story. We're going to talk about it in community group this week. So if you're in a community group, chapter 6, 7, and 8, read it. It's an incredible account. It's an incredible battle. There's so much in the book of Gideon. It's a whole series. We might do that sometime. But I pause here. This is the moment that he jumped. He still questioned God. He still had problems. I want you to understand that. Just because you jump doesn't mean you're not going to have problems. What I'm telling you is this is the moment Gideon got up on the platform and he said, okay, I give up. I lose control. And he went out and he did what God said. Now look when he did it. But maybe I didn't have to include this part, but it's kind of funny. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he was afraid of the town of Windsor. Okay. Because he was afraid of the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. You know what it means? It isn't going to be perfect. That's the whole point. What you're going to do isn't going to be perfect. The conversation with God isn't going to be perfect. Now I did this and now everything's going to be perfect. That's not how it works. I'm going to do it perfectly. No, you're not. But you're going to give what you can to God. And when you jump, God will show up. And if you read the end of this battle, guess what? For 40 years they had peace. Gotcha. Okay. So here's where I want to end. If you want to overcome despair, you got to jump. That simple. You got to jump. No more excuses. No more negotiating. I can't do it, and I'm going to wait until tomorrow because it doesn't work that way. God is here, and he's sitting next to you. And if you're in despair, you know what he's saying? It's time. Jump. You trust me? Now put up a picture. Are you ready to jump? Because it's that moment right here where as soon as you go over this ledge, you lose control. Now, I'm not asking you to go bungee cord jumping. We could sign up and everybody go, okay? Most people would say no. You know what you're trusting? What's hooked to you? You know what you're trusting when you parachute? The parachute. You might not trust that stuff. I got you. But my question is in your life and in your despair. Here's what I'm asking you. Do you trust God enough to jump? Do you trust God enough today that if it's him, that we're going to do the same thing that Gideon did today? And what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask the praise team to come. And I'm going to ask some prayer partners to come or some leaders. If we don't have enough, I just want you to come because I have a feeling there might be somebody that needs you. And you may feel compelled or you may not. I don't know. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to pray. And today we're going to make an altar to the Lord. You know what that means? We're not going to burn anything. Okay? Don't take this literally. Please don't strike any matches. But it's us. We're going to come and we're going to say, God, I offer myself. I'm ready. I'm ready to jump. Whatever I'm holding back, I'm ready to offer. You know what? Whatever idol I have in my life, I'm ready to cut it down and do it. And it may take some doing after today, and I might have to go out and do some things, but I'm going to need to start right here. And this is the moment. This is the semicolon. This is where I thought my life was a period, and now I know it's just a semicolon, and God is saying, I'm not done with you yet. I don't care what you've done. Can I tell you something about this whole story? It was their fault. They did this to themselves. Maybe that's you. And you thought, God can't use me because it's my fault. You know what? God can use you. God can forgive you. God can do an incredible thing in your life, and all he's waiting for you to do is this. Would you jump? Let me say something. When you jump, you won't be afraid anymore. What's got you will hold on to you. Gotcha? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kneel down here. Anybody wants to come up and pray, you can do that. Let's stand. We're going to sing a song together. And if you need to pray, come on up and pray with us.